It's always better if I can get boots on the ground. It's always better. And I tell every, agency or family that I work with, it's always better to get boots on the ground. I can only do so much um, using mapping software. I mean, Google Earth now, it's like flying a drone. It's pretty good. I mean, obviously it's not, um, yeah, you have different, you can go time lapse and stuff, but it's not always up to date, but it's still pretty good. And but again, getting boots on the ground, like you said, every time you do that, you just get a complete feel for the area that you couldn't, things that you would never otherwise see, whether it's just the detail or whether it's because of foliage cover or whatever else. Or yeah, so any chance I get, I'm on site.
That's Doug MacGregor, a geographic profiler. This is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. I'm Jason Blair. Doug MacGregor specializes in geographic profiling, operational mapping, and the study of data that varies both over space and time to uncover patterns, trends, and other things that evolve geographically and temporally. Doug's work to explore a wide range of complex investigations, including violent crimes like serial offending, no-body homicides, missing persons cases, and suspicious deaths. Doug developed the spatial, temporal, environmental, and geographic model of geographic profiling, which seeks to analyze the relationships between events, clusters, and pathways, examining the timing and rhythm of activities so you can explore the physical and social features that influence site selection and utilize geographic knowledge and behaviors related to travel to build geographic profiles. In essence, Doug's work combines what is known about behavior, travel patterns, places, time, and other information to target areas for prioritization. This type of work can also work in reverse, supporting investigators and criminal profilers who are behavioral analysts as they attempt to connect a body to an offender. Beyond his investigative casework, Doug has contributed to the advancement of geographic profiling practice and the practice of this applied science through training, published research, and expert commentary. Based in Prince Edward Island in Canada, Doug works with a wide variety of agencies, organizations, and media internationally. Today, we're going to talk about the art and the science of geographic profiling. Hey, Doug, I just wanted to thank you for joining me. This is really exciting for me. One, I heard you on Julia Cowley's podcast, The Consult, walking through the Karina Holmer case, and I was just so impressed by the nuance and so impressed by sort of the way that you really brought forward what the profession of geographic profiling can do and the extra layer that it can add. And then certainly, I've been following your comments online for a while. And I just really thought it would be neat to sit down and kind of talk about, how these tools can be utilized, because I sort of feel like it's one of those things similar to behavioral profiling that, or even some of the advances in DNA, that because often law enforcement is so behind on what is capable, they don't really know, I think, all of what's available to them. And so I'm excited to talk about it.
Jason, thank you for having me on. I was just as excited, when you messaged me about coming on your show. I've listened to quite a few episodes of your show. I just listened to the most recent one. It was well done. And I guess we've been following each other for a while on social media. So I was excited when you sent me a message and sent me the invite. I'm looking forward to this.
I have to tell you, I've been thinking about it for 6 months. So, so it's been in my heart for a while. One of the things that, I mentioned you being on Julia's podcast, The Consult. One of the things for me that really stuck out was I just think the ability that geographic profiling has to be powerful. But there was something else that was super clear to me too, that no matter how good the tools are or the data sets that you have to have a really sharp mind when it comes to the nuances. And that was a really neat thing to see, particularly the two of you doing that. And I wanted to just start off by maybe talking about how you got into geographic profiling and what the profession is and what it can do and what it can't do.
Of course. My journey into geographic profiling, it wasn't direct by any means. It was kind of a little all over the place. I started into political science in my undergrad with international relations and a minor in Russian, actually. Um, After that, I fell in love with the whole world of international relations, international security, and I went down to Missouri State University and did a master's in defense and strategic studies. Our department was actually in Fairfax, Virginia, which allowed
Ah.
me, yeah, which allowed me to do a an internship at the Heritage Foundation in Washington D.C. Um, I was this liberal Canadian coming down and working at the Heritage Foundation. I had no idea what the Heritage Foundation was
Oh, you
about.
naive
I
Canadians.
know, and it's funny because I look back and they sent me a questionnaire when I applied for the internship, and I didn't even know half the answers because obviously I'm not American, and but they loved it and they took me. But I was working in I was as a defense and foreign policy intern, so I avoided a lot of the real political side of it. And at that time, it was really focused on missile defense. That was a big project at the time.
Yeah.
Um, but
And I'll
what?
give you a pass too, because the old heritage was much more policy focused, much more. I could see how someone like you or me could, at least on the policy side of it, get a lot out of it. I just think, Washington has changed over the years. If,
Sure, sure.
so one of the things that I was thinking of as you were saying that when you said you were a political science major, I was thinking to myself, like, political science majors and I really loved each other because we were like the only people who knew where the countries were.
Yeah, okay.
So
Yep.
right there,
Right.
I yeah, I was probably the only kid at my college who had a globe in his room.
Yeah. Yeah. I had several maps in my room, so I can relate to that.
But you were
Yeah.
saying,
Yeah. So anyway, I was at that had that internship, but when I was in that program, we had guest speakers come in and we went to different places. I went to the White House, we went to the Pentagon. I wasn't allowed to go to CIA headquarters because I was Canadian. I was a foreigner. Um, but we had a guest speaker. I think he was from the FBI come in, and he was talking to us about terrorism. And one of the things he spoke to us about was profiling terrorists. And so that really caught my attention and kind of got me into the world of behavioral analysis. Um, and that the whole geopolitical side of me that kind of intertwined, and I found geographic profiling, and it was where I kind of knew I was meant to be. So after I was done that program, I then went into and I took different courses, programs in uh, crime and intelligence analysis, victimology, different forensic courses, and one of the classes I took was specifically geographic profiling, and it was taught by one of the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, criminal profilers or behavioral profilers at the time, and so and I was hooked.
oh, neat. No, I completely see it. I mean, the it is so fascinating. And I wasn't really, other than sort of, through television, wasn't really exposed to the idea of profiling until I was a little bit older, sometime in my late 20s. But, psychology was one of my sort of routes and themes. And I just love the idea. And certainly profiling in behavioral science is not all psychology, but it was really cool to see how, something I studied and was interested in could be practically applied in the real world to have some positive impact on people. And I guess, I get how being exposed probably to behavioral profiling must be fascinating at that age.
It was, and I mean, it still is, but I kind of immersed myself into that world and read everything I could and learned everything I could. But geographic profiling, where it falls on the spectrum with regards to criminology, is it's one of the practical applications of environmental criminology. So with environmental criminology, you have the three practical applications are crime mapping, CPTED, which is crime prevention through environmental design, and then geographic profiling. So that's where it falls. Now, obviously, it has elements to it that kind of work hand in hand with forensic behavioral analysis, but for the most part, geographic profiling started off as theoretical, and then it was commercialized, and software has been developed from it. But it's really come a long way, but it's still a very niche field, and in my opinion, a tool that has not um, gotten as much exposure and attention as it should.
And would it be fair to say that environmental criminology, as the sort of broader umbrella, instead of sort of asking the question, why is this person a criminal, it really asks why, like traditional or most of criminology does. It asks, why did this crime happen here at this time in this way? And then there's the public policy piece of how we can deal with it. There's the geographic profiling. Would that be a fair description of it?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's pretty close. So, I mean, your traditional profiling would be your who, your why, um, and then your geographic profiling is going to be your where and your when, right? And then they kind of both incorporate the what and the how. But you're really looking at where and when, space and time, in its most simplest terms. But that's why they complement each other really well, because I work with you know traditional behavioral analysts, and they help narrow down a suspect field in their own way, and then I help narrow down that same suspect field by narrowing down a location. So they really go together and complement one another. But the geographic profiling element, just it's not as popular, it's not as widely used as your traditional behavioral forensic behavioral analysis or profiling.
Why do you think that's so?
Uh, I I don't want to take credit. I don't want to take credit away from anybody or anything like that. But it's in my opinion, it's always been a theory based exercise, and from there it got commercialized. That's
Hmm.
that's it got commercialized into software. So different parties that were working on geographic profiling, and all the credit to them. The grandfathers of geographic profiling, Rosmo here in North America, and Cantor over in the UK, and some other names. And they've done great things. They've got great theory out there. They've really helped move it along, push it along, and apply it to real cases. But they both also commercialized it, as did numerous others. I think there's upwards of 10 different geographic profiling commercial softwares out there right now. Um, but then really what it comes then the software, the money becomes your kind of your mission, your goal, your motive, right? Selling that software and
Hmm.
utilizing that software. So I think that had a role to play, and I think that's why it's not as widely used, and I think that's also why the scope of geographic profiling isn't where it needs to be. And my main goal is really expanding the scope of geographic profiling and what it can do, because it isn't just for serial crime.
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
and 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 the software is good. I'm not saying the software is not good. The software is good, but in order for the software to work, you need a serial you need you need serial crime where there's at least 5 cases or more.
Hey, it's Howie Mandel, and I am inviting you to witness history as me and my Howie Do It gaming team take on Gilly the King and Wallow 267's $1 million gaming in an epic global gaming league video game showdown. 4 rounds, multiple games, 1 winner, plus a halftime performance by multi-platinum artist Travie McCoy. Watch all the action and see who wins and advances to the championship match against Neo right now at globalgamingleague.com. That's globalgamingleague.com. Everybody games.
The Bleacher Report app is your destination for sports. Right now, the NBA's heating up, March Madness is here, and MLB is almost back. Every day there's a new headline, a new highlight, a new moment you've got to see for yourself. That's why I stay locked in with the Bleacher Report app. For me, it's about staying connected to my sports. I can follow the teams I care about, get real-time scores, breaking news, and highlights all in one place. Download the Bleacher Report app today so you never miss a moment.
So if you don't have 5 cases, it's not really going to produce results for you. And how often do we get violent serial crime where there's 5 cases or more, right?
Because you're really then limiting yourself pretty significantly. And I also think and this is by no means the only field where we've seen this, but sometimes we confuse the tool for the applied science, right? That, it's different. You can give me Canva, but I'm still not an artist.
Right.
And right? So I think we have this habit of, using computer systems to make certain things easier, and it can almost feel like it does it, but I have to believe it's really the human that does it behind the system, because we're also looking at so many variables and so many factors and so many different kinds of data sets. I can't imagine we're at a point where we could put that all in one program or have avenues to just have the program pop out the answer for us.
Yeah, we're not. I mean, obviously, we're not at that point yet. I mean, who knows where AI and anything else like quantum or whatever take us. But I don't even, I don't use the geographic profiling software. I don't even have access to it. It's very expensive. You have to be a law enforcement agency. So it's not even in my realm. But even I have access to, and it's got some special stuff in it that, ArcGIS, your typical GIS software, doesn't have, like linkage analysis. But even yet, I do all my geographic profiling. I do it all manually. And usually most of the time I'm looking at individual cases. Serial crime is, yes, I look at serial crime, but it's not the most popular type of case that I look at, not even close. So generally speaking, I'm just looking at an individual event, and that software wouldn't even come in handy for that anyway. So
right.
Yeah.
Sort of like the underlying premise underneath all of this, when I think about it, is crime is not random. We talk about random crimes, but it's not really random. You need to have a motivated offender. You need to have a suitable victim, right? And that's why victimology is so important. You need absence of some kind of protection, something that makes the person vulnerable. And then the next leg of it is you need a place and a time to make that crime possible. And it seems like geographic profiling closes out sort of like the 4th leg of the stool, if that makes sense. And sort of, is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, I'd say it's pretty close. I mean, everything you just named, that's routine activity theory. And that's one main theory in environmental criminology. You have your suitable target, your motivated offender, and your absence of a guardian. So that right there, that's routine activity theory. I don't even really, yes, I agree. You need to have those for a crime to commit. I hate the routine part of that definition. I've got my own kind of
actual label.
Yeah, I've got my own theories, if you want to, methodologies is the better word. Like routine convergence theory, I use quite a bit. That's just something I've labeled myself, and it's looking at because a lot of crimes are because of routine behavior, And so that routine activity theory, the routine part doesn't really fall into it. And I've got a few others too that I've really defined. But I'm not an academic writer.
Yeah.
I don't sit there and write theory. I don't write academic publications and articles. That's just not who I am. So I use it all in a practical sense, an operational sense. Maybe someday I'll put some of this on paper, but
Well, when I was first getting into psychology, it was a time where everybody was specializing in something. Like you were a cognitive behavioral therapist, you were a cognitive therapist, you were a dialectic behavioral therapist, and everybody adhered to these theories. But there's this very famous psychologist, Irving Yalom, who said, you're not a X theory person or a Y theory person. I mean, you can be, but you're not going to be particularly effective. When you're really good is when you learn all the theories that are solid, you learn when to apply them, and you pull whatever tool you need out in the moment because you know which tool works, and you're able to make it effective. And throughout my career, I work with a lot of researchers on some of the personality psychology stuff, and one of the things that we talk about often is, your goal is to dig in and find out whether a theory is valid, right? As a researcher, theirs is. Mine is to take whatever you find, along with whatever the other guy finds and whatever the other guy finds, and figure out a way to throw it in the real world and make it work. And I think as an applied person, somebody who's applying science, it's quite different than somebody who's studying science, if that makes sense.
yeah, no, that makes complete sense. Yeah.
Yeah. It reminds me of Brian Koberger in the University of Idaho case when everyone was like, he was able to do this because he was studying criminology. I was like, yeah, no, that's not what criminology is. It's not like tactical skills for committing crimes.
Yeah, how to get away with murder. It's like a TV show.
It's a different course, man. Different course.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, no doubt he was interested in that stuff. I mean, he was studying it. He was probably had all the books and whatever, but it's not, I mean, it's just like, Rex Heuermann was doing the same thing, right? He was studying those books. I mean, all those
Israel Keys, yeah.
all those criminals, they study those books and they may get little tidbits here and there, how to cover up a crime or something like that, but it's not going to help you.
Yeah.
Not going to help you.
Also, the data set is problematic, as I say. Like, if you were going to study someone, study the people who got away with it. Oh, wait, we don't have any data on them, so you can't study them. You're inherently, studying people who have failed at some point.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to ask you, where is geographic profiling, effective, and where should it not be used? And part of what's got me thinking about this a little bit has been the Nancy Guthrie case.
Sure.
I constantly see people online asking, the people to do profiles. I think they're probably talking about, a behavioral profile. And I keep thinking to myself, without knowing the actual facts, media rumors and other stuff like that is not going to make it particularly effective to do. And, so not just maybe where it's appropriate and it's not, but what information do you need to have to even begin going down that road?
Sure. So, I mean, I'm coming from, so the cases I work, I focus mostly on major crimes, violent crime, serial crime, nobody homicides, missing persons, death investigations. I pretty much avoid the non-violent crime, so I'll just kind of put that out there up front. That when it comes to like serial crime, the carjackings, auto theft,
robberies,
all that. All robberies, violent, but yeah, I don't do that kind of stuff. So I focus more on the violent side of it, the major crime side of it, and kind of branching out into fugitive stuff and some other neat areas that have come along in the last little while. But where can it be used and where can it not be used? In my in my experience, you don't know until you've seen the case. So when somebody, so when somebody contacts me, an investigator, detective contacts me, and they say, "Hey, Doug, I got this case. Do you think you can help us out?" I always just do a free consult at the beginning, and I say, just tell me about your case, and I'm straight up front with them, and I either say, "Yeah, I think I can do something for you here. Well, try my best. You can't promise anything," or there's the geographic profiling won't be applicable here. But my geographic profiling is really only kind of one skill set that I apply. I've kind of branched out, and I have other areas like spatial temporal, so timeline reconstruction, spatial investigations, crime scene analysis from a spatial perspective. So all these other areas that kind of feed off of geographic profiling, sometimes they can be applied to an investigation. So it's 10 years ago, anybody would have said, well, it's not a serial crime. Geographic profiling cannot be used, but it's not like that anymore. So it's really getting into different kinds of cases now.
Yeah. And so when you say spatial, you're talking about sort of time as one element of it, right? And then you're also looking at the geographic piece of it. But go ahead and tell me, you mentioned the part that was kind of interesting. You mentioned the part like even the physical sort of scene of a crime scene. What does that look like?
Yeah, well, I can give you a good working example. So I helped out the family with the Rachel Morin case.
The woman who was attacked in Maryland.
Exactly. Yeah. I think it was 2023. Yeah. So I helped out their family with that case. And, when I got down there, I visited the trail area twice, and I wasn't working directly with law enforcement on that case, but it was really frustrating to see. I mean, they did a great job. They caught the guy. But it was frustrating to see that their crime scene was this little tiny area from the trail into the tunnel where she was ultimately found 70 yards away. And the crime scene should have been the entire trail system, the entire park. That's what the crime scene, because the offender didn't just pop up out of the ground, attack Rachel, leave her there, and disappear behind a rock.
Right.
He entered the park, he exited the park, and all these areas, I like, coming and going, I like to refer to these areas as crime scene corridors. So you don't just have a crime scene, you have the crime scene corridors in and out. And ultimately, along those corridors is where they eventually found the shovel that they were able to pin him for premeditation. And they eventually found one of her iPods, I think it was.
And those weren't near the actual scene of the attack, right? Or where her body was. They were somewhere.
Yeah, they were about 100 yards away in different directions. So, I mean, when I was down there, I was looking at the crime scene, obviously, but I was identifying these routes in and out where evidence may or may not be found. But these are things that investigators should be trained to, and some aren't, but they should be trained to do, is apply the spatial analysis to a crime scene, and not just looking for that evidence, but how that offender carried out that crime and how they traveled and moved in the commission of that crime. And I mean, that gets us back to the Guthrie case as well.
Right. How they moved in that space. Maybe I think a little bit too much like a criminal, but I think about this. I love this story. So one time I had a client. He was a opioid addict, and he came into my office and he said, "I just scammed this doctor out of a prescription for Oxycontin, and I don't want to take it." So what I did was, he gave me the prescriptions, and I ripped them, ate part of it, took part of it, threw it in my trash can, walked down the hall, threw part of it that way, walked in the opposite direction down the steps. Part of this was all show, right? And threw it into a dumpster outside. And you just think to yourself logically, if you were not hiding a prescription from your client and you were committing a crime, one that you could be arrested for, you're not geographically going to make it easy for people to get you. Just like I wasn't going to make it easy for my client when they regretted handing me that prescription to come back in 2 hours and grab it out of my trash can.
Mhm.
And I think sometimes we have a hard time, or investigators, because of the intensity, because of, the singular focus on areas or political pressure, sort of like stepping back and broadening our aperture and really thinking like, if I potentially could go to the jail for the rest of my life for this, am I going to make it easy for you? Probably not.
Yeah, no. And, a lot of times they think they're being smart. They think they're hiding their tracks. They think they're, doing something that's going to throw off an investigator. But,
But
behavior.
even in my example, I think somebody who really paid attention to behavior could have probably guessed how far I would have gone for this little show I was doing, and what directions I would have gone, and that I wouldn't have crossed the street because that's a barrier, right? A mental barrier, even if it had been a good place. So even though they're not going to make it easy for you, it doesn't mean you can't figure out the pattern, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, you can piece that together, but the big thing with your example is you created a lot of risk for yourself.
Yep.
And this is what criminals will do sometimes, is that by ripping up that piece of paper and spreading it out in 10 different spots, now there's
10 pieces of evidence.
Yep. 10 pieces of evidence, and that's a lot more likely to be found than one piece hidden in one spot, right?
And once I went walking, there were all the people in the hallway who saw where I was going. And, once I went out, I'm leaving evidence sort of like everywhere I'm going. It reminds me of the conversation that you had with Julia last May when the consul did the Karina Holmer case.
Mhm.
She's the 20-year-old Swedish au pair, dismembered. Her remains were found in a dumpster behind a house in Boston. And, Julia became really interested in the case when she joined the FBI Boston, but I was actually working for the Boston Globe when it happened. And, one of the really, and I was actually, when it literally happened, I was in Virginia for the Globe on, I don't know if you know about the Shenandoah murders, Loli Winans and Julia Williams, which is another geographically interesting case. But it was really interesting to hear you put the geographic profiling lens on it. And I remember this moment where you two were talking about, the distances people would travel and sort of what kind of buffer zone they would put between themselves and whether they would cross a highway or not. And you made this brilliant point about in an apartment building, you also have to count that space, just like you were walking flat. And I was like, that is a really, really, really good point. That geography is not just sort of the flat surface that we're looking at, like when we're thinking of a road, it's the whole spatial construct.
Yep. Yes, exactly. And that's really important when it comes to urban crime. I mean, just looking at crimes in apartment buildings, most of the time it's somebody who lives in that apartment building that committed the crime. And it's not just because of access control and having a key to get into the apartment. It's because that apartment building, as you just mentioned it, is an entire community. If you laid it all out as individual houses, it would be an entire subdivision of a city.
Right. So you have to then apply a different kind of lens to it. With that one in particular, with Karina's case, one of the things, I mean, there were lots of different theories about it and lots of potential suspects for it. And I do think the Boston Police Department, I'll be the first to be critical of the police department, really have worked the case hard over the years. One of the things you guys talked about were sort of like the comfort zones of people, the potential patterns of movements and sort of like anchor points. You guys were talking about different anchor points. What are those things, and how do you, as a profiler, even sort of get the underlying data that helps inform your understanding and how you can extrapolate that to solving or profiling a crime?
Well, anchor points are just, I mean, we all have them in our lives. They're the places that we frequent the most. So our home is obviously our greatest anchor point. And then anywhere else that you go to on a regular basis. So your work is an anchor point. If you go to your parents' house every week, that's an anchor point. These are all anchor points, and there's strong ones and there's weak ones, but these are all anchor points. So when we're trying to figure out a suspect, or we have our eyes on a suspect, I want to create a geographic profile of that individual. And to do that, I'm going to start collecting everything I know about them and the people they trust. Trust is a huge thing when it comes to crime, because it's, if you're committing a crime and you're going to tell anybody or involve anybody, obviously that trust is going to come into play. So you want to know who they trust the most, and then you also want to know where they frequent the most and those anchor points of theirs. So you're going to start to plot all that down, and you're going to plot their entire life down, every place they're familiar with, every place they go, the routes they take, and you want to create eventually, and this is like a theory that's really kind of evolved over time, from the circle theory in environmental criminology to the convex hull, and now to what I like to call behavioral envelope mapping. And it just creates a picture of where this person is active. It creates what we commonly refer to as their awareness space. And then you kind of get an idea of how this suspect interacts in space and time. And, we know where we go and we go where we know. So it really helps to make sense of some of the activities that they're carrying out in the commission of the crime, or before or after.
And do you think some of that's okay? So these anchor points are going to be the places that I know the most, and the anchor points that are closest to, where I live or where my parents live or where I work are going to be sort of the spaces that I can move around with most comfortably. But is it also sort of true that, people may operate just a little bit outside of their normal comfort zone because they don't want it to be too close to them? Is that still a theory people believe?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we all go outside of our awareness space, and many of us have multiple awareness, like different awareness spaces. You were telling me before the show all the different places you've lived in, so you have an awareness space in every single one of those spots.
Right.
But we all travel outside of our awareness space for different activities. Maybe there's a lake we like to go to, or someplace else. So when it comes to, let's say, a no-body homicide, and we have a suspect, and we're looking for where they may have placed a body. I'm just going to make this kind of simple here, but we may say, okay, this is their awareness space, but they love to go out to this lake area. Well, that'll be one of the areas that we kind of focus in on, the route there and back, plus the lake itself. Because, spatially, we all, we like to be in familiar areas, because as soon as we get to it, and this concept is really interesting, because we tend to think of, I live in this city, this is my awareness space. It's actually not. Your awareness space is actually very, very small. And I'll give a perfect example. Let's say you live in suburbia, right? And you live in a subdivision. Well, the subdivision right across the street, you may never go there.
Right.
You have no reason to be there. Right? Unless you have kids and there's a park there or something, but you have no reason to be there. You have no reason to drive through there. So you're not familiar with the roads. You're not familiar with the houses, the neighbors, the places to hide and conceal. You're just not. So our awareness space is actually a lot smaller than we think it is. But these are some of the things that you're going to kind of take into account when you're looking at those types of cases.
And that's interesting. You made me think of something when I was living in a suburb. We had a house in a neighborhood, and there was a neighborhood across sort of I don't want to call it a highway, but a big street from us. And then there was a neighborhood behind us. And the people in our neighborhood never went to the neighborhood behind us. And in fact, they would end up walking further within our own neighborhood, you know, to visit friends or to go places, as opposed to walking into this neighborhood that physically was closer to us. But, it had the fence, people's fences and other things like that. But we were the one house where there was no fence behind us, and we had a path into the other neighborhood. So we constantly went, but it was just our house. And the other folks in our neighborhood didn't go there. And so it would be really interesting in thinking about us. You could tell sort of like that little detail and that little path and that little trail would have probably given you a better idea that I had a different comfort zone, because that's where I went on my walks into the other neighborhood, than, even maybe my neighbor 5 doors down who couldn't access my path. And it's kind of interesting how when you have a suspect, you can really sort of make some extrapolations about where that person may have done something. Like, I think about the route that I run on. I run by this lake, and I think the point you were making about what we're comfortable with is very true. I think it's like it goes down to some base human need to keep ourselves safe. So we have awareness of certain areas. And, I'm curious, though, whether you can reverse it, right? Like, so in that example, we have a suspect and we're looking at their anchor points. Can you go backwards from the crime scene to the likely anchor points?
Yeah, you can start with the crime scene and go backwards. If I start with the crime scene, I mean, it depends what type of crime I'm looking at. But if I'm starting with a homicide and I have a body, the first thing I'm going to sort out is the relationship. That's one of the first things, the relationship between the victim and the offender. And there's ways to do that just by looking at how the body was disposed of and the condition of the body and the crime committed to the body. So you can start to figure out that relationship. And then from there, you can start to narrow down a list of suspects. And then you can also start to figure out, where the body was found and the likely route it was taken to get there. And, you trace back that route, and where does that route lead to? So there's lots of ways that you can start to look backwards from a crime, spatially, behaviorally, and try and figure out, who may have committed this crime. And again, with geographic profiling, it's an investigative tool. I'm never pinpointing a spot. I'm never pointing the finger at an individual. I'm just making everything more efficient, resource allocation, time. I'm narrowing down areas like search prioritization, or I'm focusing on a smaller group of suspects or suspect type.
So you're really helping investigators prioritize, whether it's their suspect or it's a physical location, prioritize your efforts in the most likely places. I wonder about missing persons cases because, there's this case that I've been reporting on for a while, and it's the case of the Ashley Loring heavy runner who disappeared in Browning, Montana in 2018. And whether she disappeared where people say she did or not is really hard to tell. But one of the really frustrating things for me, in addition to there being no body, you don't even really know in that situation truly. You know what people say, but you don't necessarily know where the person disappeared from, like the exact spot. You don't have the crime scene leg of it in the same way, and you've got lots of other challenges. In that particular case is on a native reservation, so you've got law enforcement jurisdictional issues, all that stuff that goes with that. And I went out this June to visit. I visited one of the suspects, the person who said he last saw her, went to his house, talked to him outside the house a little bit, checked out the area, all the normal things. And I had already the day before visited the site where he said she had disappeared from. And then I drove from his house up the mountain to where he said she disappeared. He was supposed to drop her off so somebody else could pick her up. And I noticed as I was driving, I was like, there are about 40 better drop-off spots. There are about 40 better places to meet someone than the one that he said he dropped her off at the top of the mountain.
Mhm.
And I thought to myself too, like when you come out of his house, about 5 minutes from his house, you can take a left and you can go to the place that he said he was taking her to in about 20 minutes instead of 35 to 40 minutes by going up the mountain. And I sort of instantly, by physically being there and walking the ground, there's no sort of like map that would have given me a feel for that. I mean, I could have looked at topography. I could have looked at all of the other stuff. I'm not sure I would have realized that there were 40 better drop-off spots. And, so in thinking about missing persons cases, I want to start by just, asking you, where do you start in a missing persons case? And how important is it to put your boots on the ground? I hate that cliche, but in this particular case, is it helpful for you?
It's always better if I can get boots on the ground. It's always better. And I tell every agency or family that I work with, it's always better to get boots on the ground. I can only do so much using mapping software. I mean, Google Earth now, it's like flying a drone. It's pretty good. I mean, obviously, it's not. You have different. You can go time lapse and stuff, but it's not always up to date. But it's still pretty good. But again, getting boots on the ground, like you said, every time you do that, you just get a complete feel for the area that you couldn't. Things that you would never otherwise see, whether it's just the detail or whether it's because of foliage cover or whatever else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So any chance I get, I'm on site.
Yeah, and it was a really interesting thing because I remember when I was first exposed to the case, it was through other media reports and people covering it, and there were sort of some prominent theories: this suspect, that suspect, or the kind of like, walk off. Somebody is either drunk or high, and they walk off into the woods. And it was really interesting, separate from the suspect, to get at the point on the mountain where he said he dropped her off, and for me to be able to see. There, because of the rock, there was nowhere to go to the left. There was a trail to the right. And even though we're at the top of the mountain here, there's no woods to go into. There's no place to fall off of at this particular point. And that's just very telling for me. And when I was able to look at a map, I would have I realized she would have had to hike 3 miles up another mountain peak to actually get to the point where she could disappear in the woods. And that was so telling for me. I remember coming back, telling some of my friends who cover the case, it was like, I think this made sense to you because you were looking at a flat map.
Mm.
And that part of it for me is, I really, former reporter here, so I always think getting there is really important. But you can tell a lot. Like I walked out of that drive with that particular suspect knowing, pretty good chance you were being untruthful.
Mm-hmm.
And the only real question now, what reason were you being untruthful? It may be because you had something to do with the crime, maybe nothing to do with the crime. Maybe you needed to explain why you were seen at this particular spot. Maybe you're trying to deflect where. But if I hadn't actually gone there, I think I would have been more inclined to believe his whole story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's. It sounds like an interesting case, and I'll take a look at it. But with missing persons cases, for myself, the first thing I do is just gather context and information, and the circumstances. Because there's so many different types of cases that are missing persons cases. Somebody lost in the woods. Dementia patient walks off, a homicide with no body, a fugitive. I mean, they're all different types of missing persons cases. So it's really, to start there and just gather information. And then like you did, just get a feel for the area, figure out, the last point seen and the last known position. of the individual, and just trying to figure out what may have transpired. Who may she have come in contact with? I mean, just this individual, we'll call him a suspect that you spoke with. Why did he even say that he dropped her off on the top of the hill? Why did he take you there?
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to spatial interviews with suspects, and what they say, it's just as important in what they show you and what they say as in what they don't. And I mean, all good interviewers know that what they say is just as important as what they don't, but it's also in what they show you. It's just as important as what they don't show you. Places they take you is important as places they don't take you. So you can kind of use that to your advantage a bit. But yeah, I mean, if he's really guilty, it's unlikely he's going to drive you to the exact spot that this happened, right? Or
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've I haven't got a lot into interviewing myself, but this is just one area that I'm really starting to apply to geographic profiling. But in a lot of, I study a lot of different police interviews or interrogations, whatever you want to call them, and I pick out all the spatial temporal data, the space and time data, and it's fascinating what you can start to piece together about a case, about an individual, just off of those two things. And there's so many different questions and different ways to apply that back into your interview, and to get more information out. So
I think you're making a great point. I remember this one case that I covered, and it was a serial case.
Mm-hmm.
Mainly, though, pretty financially motivated in this. I mean, there was probably a sexual motive in there, but it very much financially motivated. It was out in the Southwest, and the guy basically got caught on one of the murders. And so he decided to cooperate with the FBI. And what he wanted for his cooperation was he wanted, a lighter sentence for taking them to the other bodies. And so he took them out to all these different places and all these other trails, and he'd be like, dig here. No, that's not it. It looks like this. It looks like that. And one of the FBI agents is with him, and they're walking down this trail, and the guy looks to his right and he's like, no, it's not there. That's interesting. I think it's down here. So the agents go and follow him, or not follow, they go in the direction that he's saying. But the one agent was like, why does that place just look like the place that we were previously at? And he turned and looked and didn't go down there. And the agent went over and found the hair clip of one of the victims. It took him a while. But that whole idea that where people don't want you to go is just as important, I think is really true. Like if you were to interview me and ask me about the 5 places that I normally go, I'm probably not going to mention the place where I put the body.
Right.
Yeah. I think this is a great place to stop part 1. We'll be back next week with part 2. In the meantime, if you'd like to join us for more discussions with me and other listeners, we can be found on most social media platforms, including a listener-run Facebook group called the Silver Linings Fireside Chat. For deeper conversations with our guests and live conversations with other listeners, and to support the podcast, you can also join us on our Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Silver Linings Handbook. I'm Jason Blair, and this is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. We'll see you guys all again soon.